The morning heat in Miami clung to the city like a second skin. The air was heavy with the scent of sea salt gasoline and freshly brewed coffee. Inside a small corner diner called Sunny Bites, Bianca Johnson balanced 3 plates on one arm and a tray of iced drinks on the other. Her smile, faint but practiced, hid the exhaustion in her eyes. She had been awake for 16 hours, cleaning houses 6 at the restaurant, the rest taking care of her mother and twin siblings. Her whole life, it seemed, was a series of shifts she couldn't clock out from. Bianca, table 4's asking for extra napkins, her manager called. "Got it," she replied, voice steady, even when her hands trembled slightly. She moved with quiet grace, her dark skin glistening under the cheap fluorescent lights. There was something in her, something unpolished, yet magnetic like sunlight caught in rainwater. But Bianca never noticed. She was too busy surviving. When her shift ended, she walked home through the sticky Miami dusk. Her sneakers were worn, her tips barely enough for rent and medication. But the thought of her mother's weak smile waiting at home always pulled her forward. The Johnson family lived in a small, fading house at the edge of Liberty City, where paint peeled like tired skin, and the sound of traffic never quite slept. Inside, her mother lay on a worn couch, a breathing machine hissing softly beside her. Ma, Bianca whispered, placing a kiss on her forehead. Her mother stirred. "You're late again, baby. Double shift." Bianca smiled. "But I brought your favorite, chicken soup." Her mother's lips curved into a weak grin. "You spoil me. If I don't, who will?" Bianca teased gently, but her eyes shimmered with worry. The woman who once sang gospel in church every Sunday now struggled to speak without gasping. As Bianca fed her, the twins Sadie and Mariah, both 10, sat cross-legged on the floor coloring old magazines. Guess what Ate Mariah said, lifting her drawing? "It's you, on a stage." Bianca laughed softly. "Me on stage." "Sweetheart, I don't even like mirrors." "But you're beautiful," Sadie insisted, "even prettier than the ladies on TV." Bianca ruffled their curls. "Pretty doesn't pay bills, baby." She didn't mean to sound bitter, but the truth had a weight that sometimes slipped through her voice. That night, after the twins went to bed, she sat by the window counting tips. $53.30. The number was too small, like every number lately, too small for hospital bills, too small for hope. Her phone buzzed. It was a voice message from her best friend, Danielle. "Girl, I signed you up for something," Danielle said in her usual dramatic tone. "Don't kill me. Okay, it's called Miss Urban Dream. Big event. The winner gets 50 grand. Sponsored by Aurum." "Yes, that Aurum. You need to show up for the audition next Saturday." Bianca blinked, what she muttered aloud, replaying the message. She could almost hear Danielle's grin through the recording. "You've got the face B and the heart. Don't you dare waste both." Bianca chuckled softly, shaking her head. "That girl's insane." She stared at her reflection in the dark window. The faint outline of a woman stared back, skin like polished mahogany eyes, tired but alive. "A model," she whispered. "Please." But the idea refused to leave, like a song she couldn't unhear. Later that night, as thunder rolled far away over the Atlantic, Bianca sat by her mother's bedside, watching the slow rhythm of the heart monitor. Each beep felt like a countdown. "Maybe Danielle's right," she whispered to no one. "Maybe it's worth a shot." Her mother stirred, half awake. "What's that, baby? Nothing, Ma. Go back to sleep." But inside her chest, something shifted. A small spark flickered against the dark. The next morning brought chaos as usual. The twins spilled cereal, the bus was late, and Bianca's boss was in one of his moods. But between the noise, she caught herself daydreaming. During her lunch break, she Googled Miss Urban Dream. The website flashed with gold letters and glossy photos of tall women in perfect dresses. Aurum presents the next generation of beauty and empowerment. She snorted. Empowerment. Sure. If you're 6 feet tall and size 0. But then she saw the tagline below, open to all women. No experience required. Her thumb hovered over the apply button. Then she locked her phone and went back to work. That evening, Danielle showed up at the diner, hair tied in a messy bun, eyes sparkling with mischief. Surprise, she said, sliding into a booth. You look tired and perfect for a makeover. Don't start, Bianca warned, pouring her friend a coffee. Oh, I already started, baby. Danielle grinned, pulling out a folded paper. This is your registration form. I told them you're coming. Danielle. $50,000, her friend interrupted. That's your mom's surgery, plus a little extra to breathe. You don't even have to win, just show up. Bianca froze. 50,000. The number echoed in her mind, enough to stop watching her mother fade. You know I can't afford fancy dresses or makeup. Then borrow mine. I've got your back. There was something fierce in Danielle's voice that disarmed her. For years, Bianca had been everyone's caretaker. It was strange, almost painful, to have someone fight for her. When she came home that night, her mother was awake, knitting something small and uneven. Hey, Ma, what's that, a scarf? For when Miami finally gets cold again, her mother joked. Bianca smiled. That'll be the day. Her mother studied her. You look different tonight. Lighter. Bianca hesitated. There's this thing, a contest. Danielle wants me to join, but it's silly. Nothing's silly if it makes you feel alive, her mother said softly. You've been carrying too much, baby. Maybe it's time to let the world see who you are. Bianca looked down, eyes stinging. What if I fail? Then fail beautifully, her mother said, reaching for her hand. But don't you dare stay small. Those words followed Bianca into her dreams. Saturday arrived like a dare. Bianca woke before sunrise, nerves tangled in her stomach. Danielle showed up with a duffel bag full of makeup heels and chaotic encouragement. Girl, we're not aiming for perfect. We're aiming for real, Danielle said, brushing powder onto Bianca's cheekbones. Bianca caught her reflection in the mirror. The transformation wasn't about lipstick or lashes. It was in the way she stood a little taller, as if remembering she had the right to exist in color and light. Let's do this, she whispered. They arrived at the Aurum Convention Hall, a towering glass building downtown. Models in designer outfits lined up, phones in hand, laughter echoing off marble floors. Bianca wanted to disappear. Danielle squeezed her hand. They're just people. B. You've survived worse. When Bianca's turn came, she stepped into a white-lit room. The panel of judges sat behind a long table, faces expressionless. A man at the far end sat slightly apart, half hidden by shadow. Name, one judge asked. Bianca Johnson. Occupation, waitress. Experience. She hesitated. Just life. A quiet chuckle rippled through the room, except from the man in shadow. He leaned forward, studying her, like she was a riddle he couldn't solve. Walk, said another judge. Bianca exhaled slowly. The room seemed to shrink, every heartbeat pounding in her ears. But she took a step, then another, each one steadier than the last. She didn't walk like a model. She walked like someone who had carried groceries in the rain, who had danced with her siblings in the dark to drown out worry. Every step said, I have survived things prettier girls could never imagine. When she reached the end of the runway, she lifted her chin, and for a second her gaze met the man's. His eyes were an unsettling gray-blue, and for a moment, something electric passed between them. He tilted his head slightly, as if recognizing a melody only he could hear. "Thank you, Miss Johnson," the judge said. "We'll be in touch." Outside, Bianca collapsed into laughter and relief. Danielle hugged her tight. "You were amazing. I almost threw up." "Yeah, but you looked good doing it." As they walked out into the Miami sunset, Bianca glanced back once at the building. Through the glass, she saw the same man still sitting in the dim room, phone pressed to his ear. Inside, Alexander King spoke quietly to his assistant. "The girl from Miami. Put her on the list." Outside, the ocean breeze lifted Bianca's hair. She didn't know yet that her life had just changed. But somewhere deep inside, she felt it, the quiet tremor before a storm. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was merely surviving. She felt like she was beginning. The city was still half asleep when Alexander King arrived at the 42nd floor of Auram's glass headquarters. Miami's sunrise bled through the tall windows, staining his reflection gold. He adjusted his cufflinks white gold minimal, the kind that whispered wealth instead of shouting it, and nodded for his assistant to enter. "Morning," Mr. King said. Olivia, a brisk woman in her 40s, who knew better than to make small talk before his first espresso. She handed him a sleek tablet. "Final shortlist for Miss Urban Dream. The PR team's waiting for your signature." He didn't look up. "Remind me again why we're doing this." Olivia hesitated. "Public image, sir. Auram wants to reposition from luxury unattainable to luxury with a soul. The contest fits the new campaign beauty with purpose." He gave a low hum, half amusement, half annoyance. "Beauty with purpose," he repeated. "That's the kind of slogan men invent to sell lipstick to women they don't respect." Olivia only smiled faintly. "And yet it works." Alexander finally glanced at the screen. Dozens of faces scrolled past, smiling, perfect, forgettable. He had seen hundreds of them, eyes trained to please, lips rehearsed to flatter. All masks, he thought, the kind he'd spent years learning to read, to distrust. Then he stopped. A new video thumbnail blinked at the edge of the list. Bianca Johnson, Miami FL. The photo was grainy, poorly lit, clearly taken on a borrowed phone. He almost skipped it. Almost. He pressed play. On screen, a young woman stood before a white wall. Her hair was natural, unstyled, and her voice trembled slightly when she introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Bianca Johnson. I don't really know why I'm doing this." She gave a nervous laugh, then straightened. "But maybe it's time I try something that scares me." Then she walked awkwardly at first, but with a rawness that silenced the sterile hum of the office around him. No pretense, no posing, just honesty, framed by tired eyes that had seen too much and still refused to break. When the clip ended, Alexander sat motionless. Sir Olivia prompted. He blinked. "Who submitted this, one of the local coordinators?" She wasn't on the shortlist, actually. That's just the raw audition footage. Why not shortlisted? Because she's not our typical demographic. He turned the tablet toward her. Define typical. Olivia knew that tone. The tone that meant the next person who answered wrong would regret it. "Our brand's been historically associated with white women in golden dresses," he finished. Silence. Alexander leaned back, exhaling through his nose. He should have scrolled past. It wasn't his job to meddle in PR projects. But something about her stayed under his skin, like a song that refused to fade. He clicked replay. Watched again. The tilt of her chin. The hesitation before she smiled. The faint shimmer of hope she tried to hide. "She's not performing," he murmured more to himself than to Olivia. "She's existing." "Excuse me." He looked up sharply. Add her to the list. Olivia hesitated. Sir, we've already confirmed the 10 finalists. If we replace someone now, then tell them the CEO overruled it. His voice was calm, but final. And keep my name off it. When she left, Alexander remained by the window watching the city wake. He wasn't sure why he'd done it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe something deeper. Something he'd buried long ago under money, noise, and control. That afternoon, his private jet flew him to New York for an investor meeting. He didn't care for small-talk champagne, or the way people's laughter always grew louder when they thought he might invest in them. He built Aurum from nothing, or so the world believed. The truth was less heroic. His father had left him a company on the brink of ruin, and Alexander had rebuilt it with precision and fury, brick by calculated brick. He turned it into an empire. But every empire comes with ghosts. After the meeting, he stayed alone in the empty penthouse suite looking out over the skyline. He thought of his mother, a model once brilliant, beautiful, and broken by the same industry he now ruled. She had taught him the cruelty of cameras, how easily beauty turned into currency. He was 17 when she took her life, her last note reading. They only loved the image, never the woman. From that day, he'd sworn he would never confuse the two. He despised these pageants for the same reason. They painted exploitation as empowerment, applause as validation. So why had he chosen Bianca? Poured himself a glass of scotch, the ice cracking like small heartbreaks. Maybe because for the first time, he'd seen someone who didn't want to be admired. She wanted to matter. A week later, Alexander returned to Miami for the pre-selection event. The convention hall buzzed with designers, sponsors, and press. Cameras flashed, perfume lingered. He stayed behind the tinted glass of the observation room, where he could watch without being seen. On the monitor, contestants strutted one by one under the blinding lights. Choreographed smiles, manufactured confidence. He almost tuned out until she appeared. Bianca Johnson. She wore a simple white dress too modest for the event, her posture slightly stiff. But there was grace in her nervousness, honesty in every uncertain step. He found himself leaning closer to the screen, heart tightening in a way that annoyed him. When she looked up straight into the camera, he forgot to breathe. It wasn't attraction, not at first. It was recognition. A mirror of something he'd lost, authenticity. He pressed a finger to the mic. "Number 5, he said to his assistant in the next room. "Note her name. Make sure she gets the follow-up call. You want her coached? No. Leave her raw. That's her power." The assistant nodded, puzzled, but obedient. Alexander remained still, long after she left the stage. The judges whispered among themselves, ranking scores, analyzing marketability. He didn't hear them. His focus stayed on the empty runway, where her presence lingered like aftertaste. For a man who prided himself on control, it was infuriating. That evening, the board hosted a private dinner at the Ritz. Glass chandeliers, gold cutlery, laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. Alexander sat through it perfectly polite, while his mind wandered back to the audition room. "Mr. King," one of the investors said, raising a glass, "the contest is a brilliant idea. The press already calls you the modern Midas. Everything you touch turns to gold." Alexander smiled thinly. Gold always tarnishes, eventually, he thought. He excused himself early, claiming calls from London, and returned to his penthouse overlooking Biscayne Bay. The silence there felt truer than any applause. He poured another drink, loosened his tie, and opened his laptop. The audition files were still there. He scrolled until he found her name again. Bianca Johnson. He played the video. Again and again. Each time the world around him dimmed. The endless meetings, numbers, and polished smiles all faded into the background. What remained was her voice, hesitant, sincere, brave. Maybe it's time I try something that scares me. He closed the laptop with a sigh. You and me both, Miss Johnson. Days passed. Preparations intensified. The finalists were announced, their faces plastered across Orum's digital billboards. 10 women, Bianca among them. No one questioned her sudden inclusion. Alexander had built a company where questions were dangerous. But in the quiet corridors of the office, whispers started. Who is she? One PR director murmured. She doesn't fit the brand image. She fits his, another said darkly. Alexander ignored them, or tried to. Until the board meeting that Friday, Alexander said, Philip, his oldest partner, we've noticed some unorthodox changes in the finalist list. One of the contestants, Johnson, doesn't align with our usual marketing demographic. Meaning, she's black? Alexander asked flatly. Philip froze. I mean, our target audience. Our target audience, Alexander interrupted, is anyone with a credit card and a conscience. Get used to it. The room went silent. No one dared push further. When the meeting ended, he remained seated, hands steepled under his chin. Somewhere between defiance and guilt, something inside him twisted. He wasn't sure whether he'd defended her because it was right, or because she had already become personal. He hated the thought. Emotion to him was weakness, and weakness cost more than money. That night, the rain returned to Miami, warm, relentless, the kind that made the city smell like salt and steel. Alexander stood by the window of his penthouse, phone in hand, scrolling through messages he wouldn't send. He could contact her easily. A text, a call, a meeting, disguised as formality. But he didn't. Not yet. There was power in distance, and curiosity fed on silence. He told himself this was just observation, a study of human resilience, nothing more. But as he watched the lightning flash over the bay, illuminating the restless waves, a thought crossed his mind. He had built a world where every move was calculated, every deal, every smile a transaction. Bianca Johnson didn't know the rules of that world, and that, God help him, was exactly why he couldn't stop thinking about her. In another part of the city, Bianca lay awake, unable to sleep, staring at the invitation email, glowing on her cracked phone screen. Tomorrow, orientation day, Aurum Convention Hall. She didn't know that somewhere above the same city skyline, the man who made it possible was staring out at the same night, haunted by the same name. The sound of heels against polished marble echoed through the vast convention hall, sharp, rhythmic, and terrifyingly loud, to Bianca Johnson. She hadn't worn heels this high in her life. The borrowed silver dress clung too tightly, and the zipper at her back scratched against her skin. But as she waited behind the curtain, clutching her contestant number in trembling hands, she kept repeating her mother's voice in her mind. Then fail, beautifully. It was the first day of the official Miss Urban Dream casting. 100 women stood around her, shimmering like glass under the light. Everything about the place screamed perfection. The cameras, the scent of expensive perfume, the confidence that came from knowing you belonged here. Bianca did not. Danielle squeezed her shoulder. You've got this, B. Just breathe. They'll see what I see. Bianca smiled weakly. If only that were enough. Across the hall, behind a wall of tinted glass, Alexander King watched the chaos unfold. From where he sat, he could see everything. The cameras, the nerves, the practiced smiles. The panel of judges murmured in low voices, flipping through files, ready to decide in seconds who was worthy of attention. He wasn't supposed to be here. CEOs didn't sit in on preliminary auditions. But something had pulled him back, Curiosity, maybe, or the need to confirm that what he saw in Bianca's tape hadn't been an illusion. Sir Olivia whispered beside him, "Should we proceed with the next group?" He didn't answer. His gaze had already found her. Bianca stood apart from the others, hands clasped in front of her, like she was praying for permission to exist. There was a fragility about her that the camera hadn't captured, but also a quiet dignity that made everyone else fade into decoration. When her name was called, she stepped forward. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as though each step cost her something. Alexander leaned closer, unconsciously. "Don't look down," he whispered, even though she couldn't hear him. The room seemed to slow. Bianca reached the center of the stage, her heels wobbling slightly on the slick floor. A judge cleared his throat. "Please, Miss Johnson, walk." Bianca inhaled. She remembered the kitchen light flickering above her mother's bed, the way her sister's laughter could still make her heart ache with love, and the weight of every shift, every night she'd worked to keep the house from falling apart. Then she moved. It wasn't elegant at first, her balance uncertain, her steps too short, but there was truth in the way she walked. She wasn't performing. She was surviving. Alexander felt something stir deep inside him, a recognition. She's not walking for herself, he thought. She's walking for someone she loves. Halfway down the runway, one of the spotlights flickered. The sudden flash made Bianca flinch. Her ankle twisted slightly, and for a second, the world tilted. Without thinking, Alexander stood. His chair scraped the floor, startling Olivia. "Sir," she whispered. He didn't answer. His heart was pounding irrationally, violently, like he was watching a car crash in slow motion. Bianca caught herself just in time. She straightened, took another breath, and continued, the faintest defiance in her eyes. By the time she reached the end of the runway, she no longer looked like a girl out of place. She looked like she belonged. When she turned, Alexander exhaled, unaware he'd been holding his breath. The audition ended. The judges began their murmured discussions, tallying points, dissecting details. "She's unrefined," one said. "No training, no stage presence." "But there's something," another countered. The audience would believe her. Alexander stayed silent. He didn't need to speak. His decision was already made. As Bianca left the stage, Danielle threw her arms around her. "You didn't fall." "You were amazing. I almost did." Bianca said, laughing breathlessly. "Almost isn't falling." They stepped outside into the heat, the noise of traffic crashing against the glass doors behind them. For a moment, Bianca allowed herself to breathe. She had done it. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not gracefully, but she'd done it. She didn't know that behind the mirrored wall, a pair of gray-blue eyes was still watching her until she disappeared from view. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. The city stretched below his penthouse like a constellation of false stars. He sat at his piano, a grand black Steinway that hadn't been played in years, and pressed a single key. The note rang through the room, pure and lonely. He thought of the way she had steadied herself after nearly falling. Most people would have tried to cover it, pretend nothing happened. But Bianca hadn't hidden her fear. She'd turned it into grace. He poured himself a drink and opened the folder Olivia had left on his desk. Bianca Johnson, age 24, occupation waitress. A grainy ID photo stared up at him, a girl trying not to smile too wide, as if afraid joy might be mistaken for arrogance. He closed the file and whispered to the empty room, "Who are you?" Bianca Johnson. For the first time in years, Alexander King felt the faint tremor of vulnerability, not the kind that came from loss or guilt, but from wanting something he couldn't quite name. The next morning, Olivia knocked on his office door. "Sir, the judges finalized the list." Would you like to review before we announce? He didn't look up from his laptop. Already did. She blinked. When? Last night. He tapped the touchpad, bringing up the roster on screen. There she was. Number 5, Johnson Bianca. Olivia frowned. You're personally approving candidates now? Just one, he said quietly. Olivia wanted to protest, but something in his tone stopped her. She'd seen Alexander dismantle boardrooms with a single sentence, but this was different. His voice carried a strange stillness, almost tenderness. Meanwhile, Bianca returned to work at the diner apron, tied hair pulled back, pretending nothing had changed. The contest felt like a dream, too fragile to touch. The regular customers congratulated her when the news broke on local media, her photo among the 10 finalists. Danielle posted about it first, of course, tagging her in all caps. Our girl made it. Bianca laughed, but didn't let herself believe it yet. She still had rent due, still had hospital bills. Glory didn't pay for medicine. That night, her manager approached her at closing time. You might have to cut your shifts next week if you're doing this modeling thing. I'll still work mornings, she promised quickly. Please don't drop me from the schedule. He shrugged. Do what you gotta do, sweetheart. Just don't forget where you came from. As if I ever could, she thought bitterly. Later that week, the finalists were invited to a private training session at Orem Studios. The studio was a temple of light and mirrors. Assistants in black scurried between makeup stations, calling out instructions. Bianca stood near the back, clutching her bag like a shield. Ladies, we'll start with a confidence exercise, the coordinator announced. Remember, you're not just walking, you're telling a story. Bianca tried to follow. She mimicked the poses, the angles, the smile that never reached her eyes. Every step felt like borrowed air. Then the coordinator pointed at her. You Miss Johnson, right? Step forward. All eyes turned. Walk to me, the woman instructed. Own the room. Bianca hesitated. The mirrors seemed to multiply her insecurities. Too dark, too plain, too different. But she thought of her mother again, whispering in that cracked voice, don't stay small. She lifted her chin, took a breath, and began. Halfway across the floor, her reflection caught her off guard. For the first time, she didn't see the tired waitress from Liberty City. She saw someone else, someone strong enough to exist in a world that had never made space for her. When she finished, silence filled the room. Then, unexpectedly, the coordinator nodded. Good. That's what I want. Don't lose that honesty. Bianca's lips parted in disbelief. Thank you. As she turned to leave the floor, she caught sight of a tall man, standing near the far wall, partly hidden behind a curtain, phone in hand. She couldn't see his face clearly, but something about his stillness drew her attention. He wasn't like the other staff members who whispered and laughed. He was simply watching. Their eyes met for the briefest second before he turned away, disappearing behind the curtain. A flicker of unease, or maybe curiosity, passed through her. Who was that? She asked Danielle later. Probably some investor. Danielle shrugged. They're everywhere in this place. But Bianca wasn't convinced. Something about that presence, quiet, commanding, familiar, stayed with her long after she went home. That night, as rain began to fall outside her window, Bianca scrolled through the finalist group chat on her phone. Messages buzzed with excitement. Designer fittings, press interviews, sponsorship rumors. She should have felt thrilled. Instead, she stared at the single unread email at the top of her inbox. From no reply at orem.com. Subject: private meeting invitation. Orem headquarters time. Monday, 7 0 p.m. Her heart skipped. The note was unsigned. No details. Just a time, an address, and one line. Please come alone. She frowned, uncertain whether it was an error or something else entirely. Outside, lightning split the sky, and in a glass tower across town, Alexander King looked down at the same storm, a single thought flickering through his mind. Monday 7 p.m. The days blurred into each other, sunlight, neon, exhaustion. Bianca had begun living on borrowed time, and coffee caught between the fantasy of Miss Urban Dream and the reality that her family still depended on her paycheck. Every morning she practiced her walk in front of the cracked mirror in her tiny apartment, a narrow hallway between the kitchen and her mother's room. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor, echoing between peeling walls. At night, she traded her heels for sneakers and worked the graveyard shift at the diner, where her reflection looked less like a dream and more like survival. Her feet ached. The blisters were new every morning. The cough had returned too, a quiet, persistent reminder that she was burning the candle from both ends. But she kept going. She always did, because in 2 weeks the competition would go live. Cameras, audience lights, a stage she couldn't afford to fail on. One night as she wiped the counter at 2 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number from Mr. You looked different in rehearsal today. More certain. She frowned. Her heart skipped, half startled, half flattered. Who is this? She typed back. Just someone who believes in what you're trying to do. She hesitated, fingers hovering above the screen. It wasn't uncommon for contestants to receive anonymous messages, fans, sponsors, weird admirers. But something about the tone felt different. Not flirtatious, not invasive, simply seeing her. And what do you think I'm trying to do? She replied. To prove that being seen doesn't require permission. She stared at the words, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. Then she locked her phone, unwilling to admit that a stranger's message had steadied her more than her own reflection ever could. Across the city, in the quiet of his penthouse, Alexander King leaned back in his chair. The city lights painted his glass walls in fractured amber. He hadn't planned to message her. He'd only meant to watch, to understand why she haunted him. But after the rehearsal that afternoon, after seeing her practice alone long after the others had gone home, he'd found himself typing before reason could stop him. He used a company test account, one of many anonymous addresses Aurum kept, for internal feedback. Mr. A was harmless, invisible, safe. Or so he told himself. Now, staring at her reply glowing on his screen, he felt something unfamiliar. Not power, not control, something dangerously close to hope. He typed again. You shouldn't practice barefoot on marble floors. You'll ruin your feet. He hit send before realizing how personal it sounded. A few seconds later, the 3 dots appeared. How do you know that? He smiled slightly. You left your shoes by the stage. I was passing by. Then you must work there, she wrote. Are you one of the crew? He paused. Then, something like that. It wasn't a lie. Not completely. Over the next few nights, their messages became a ritual. Short, careful exchanges that stretched until dawn. Bianca talked about her mother's health, her fear of not belonging, the way people looked at her, as if she'd wandered into the wrong dream. Mr. A never gave much away. He asked questions instead, always listening, always knowing the right thing to say. What keeps you going? He asked once. The people I love. The thought that maybe I can build a life where my family doesn't have to choose between medicine and rent. That's not a dream, he replied. That's survival dressed as hope. She smiled at that. For the first time in years, someone understood without pitying her. When she asked about him, his answers were brief, distant. "What do you do, Mr. A? I build things. Sometimes I break them first." "That sounds lonely." "It is." And just like that, silence filled the chat. Bianca stared at the screen until the gray light of morning washed the room. At Orem headquarters, Alexander's assistant noticed the change before he did. "Sir, you're different lately," Olivia said one afternoon, narrowing her eyes, smiling at emails now. "Should I be worried?" He didn't look up from his phone. "You worry too much, Olivia." "Someone has to," she said dryly, "especially when my boss starts behaving like a man with a secret." He only smirked. "Maybe I finally found something worth keeping." Olivia froze. The words were casual, but the tone wasn't. Later, when he entered the rehearsal hall unannounced, the contestants stiffened. Bianca didn't notice him at first. She was too focused on balancing a stack of books on her head, an old-school trick Danielle had shown her to improve posture. Alexander stayed in the shadows, hands in his pockets, watching. When she stumbled, he almost stepped forward, but she caught herself again, laughing softly, brushing it off. He turned away before she could see him, leaving behind the faintest trace of confusion on his face. He'd built empires, signed billion-dollar deals, walked away from love without looking back. But this ordinary girl with worn shoes, had become the only thing he couldn't compartmentalize. The messages continued. "Mr. A," she wrote one night, "why do you never sleep? Maybe for the same reason you don't. And what's that? We both want to prove we exist." Her breath caught when she read it. It was terrifyingly true. The next day, Bianca's exhaustion caught up to her. During rehearsal, her vision blurred and she stumbled mid-turn. The coordinator rushed to her side, snapping orders for someone to get water. "I'm fine," she insisted, waving them off. But her hands shook as she gripped the railing. Later that evening, as she limped toward the bus stop, a text arrived. "You're pushing yourself too hard." She froze. "Were you there today?" A long pause. "I see more than you think, Bianca." She stared at the message, heart pounding. How could he possibly? But before she could reply, another message appeared. "Rest tonight. You can't inspire anyone if you collapse." She should have been scared. Maybe she was. But instead of fear, she felt protected, seen. That night she dreamt of a faceless man standing behind glass, watching her, with eyes full of sorrow. Meanwhile, Alexander was losing his composure piece by piece. He told himself the messages were harmless encouragement, nothing more than professional interest. But each time she replied, each time her words appeared on his phone, he felt a pull stronger than logic. He started staying at the office longer, using work as an excuse to keep their midnight conversation alive. He'd never met her outside of that glass wall, never spoken to her aloud. Yet he knew the rhythm of her thoughts, the weight of her silences. When she told him her mother's condition was worsening, he almost revealed himself. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I can help you." He typed it, stared at the words, then deleted them. Power had always been his currency, but with her offering help, felt like theft. A week before the competition, Bianca received a delivery at the diner, a small box wrapped in gold ribbon. Inside was a pair of handmade shoes, elegant but sturdy, engraved discreetly on the sole, for the woman who walks for more than herself. No sender name, only a note. She ran her thumb across the message, smiling despite herself. "Mr. A," she typed later, "did you send me something?" There was a long pause before the reply came. "If I did, it's because I believe you should have something that doesn't hurt to wear. You really do know me, don't you? Maybe more than I should." She bit her lip, reading that line again and again until her break ended. For the first time in a long time, The thought of tomorrow didn't scare her. That night, as thunder rolled over Miami, both of them sat awake miles apart, staring at the same storm through different windows. Alexander typed one last message before turning off his phone. Do you ever wonder why some people find each other even when they're not looking? Bianca smiled faintly as the message lit up her dark room. Maybe because they're both awake when the rest of the world sleeps. Neither of them knew that the truth was closer than they thought, that the glass wall between them was thinner than either imagined. And as the rain drummed against the city, two insomniac souls, bound by pixels and secrets, began writing the kind of story that could only exist in the hours before dawn. The night of the finale arrived like a gathering storm. Miami's skyline burned with light searchlights crossing above the convention center, music pulsing from every corner. Cameras, flashes, voices, the world's attention compressed into one dazzling, merciless space. Backstage. Bianca sat before a mirror framed with bulbs that hummed softly. Her reflection looked foreign, her hair swept into a crown of curls, her lips painted in the color of courage. The red gown shimmered against her skin, hugging her like armor. She'd never owned anything like it, never felt this exposed, this alive. Danielle stood behind her, holding her hand. You ready, B? Bianca managed a small laugh. Do I have a choice? Danielle grinned. Not anymore. When her friend left, Bianca stayed for a moment staring at the woman in the mirror. The lights around her flickered slightly, as if echoing her heart. Beneath the glitter and the fabric, she still saw the waitress, the daughter, the girl who walked barefoot on cold floors. But maybe, just maybe, that girl had learned how to walk in fire. She closed her eyes and whispered, "For you, Ma." On the other side of the hall, Alexander King adjusted his cufflinks and took his seat in the VIP section. The tuxedo fit him perfectly, of course. Everything he owned did. But nothing about tonight felt comfortable. He shouldn't have come. He told himself that a dozen times on the way here. CEOs didn't attend beauty pageants. It was too public, too personal. But he'd built this show, handpicked its spirit and its star, whether anyone knew it or not. And now, sitting beneath the golden chandeliers, he felt an unfamiliar weight in his chest. Guilt, pride, fear. When Bianca stepped onto the stage, the entire hall shifted. The red gown caught the light, rippling like flame. The crowd fell silent, as though sensing something real amid all the perfection. Alexander gripped his glass, the cool stem cutting into his palm. She walked to the center, poised, steady, radiant. But it wasn't the kind of beauty that begged for approval. It demanded recognition, the kind that said, "I'm here, whether you like it or not." The host's voice broke the stillness. Our final question of the night to contestant number 5, Miss Bianca Johnson. Bianca exhaled slowly. She could feel every camera on her, every gaze waiting to measure her worth. The judge, a well-known editor, smiled politely. In your own words, Miss Johnson, what does beauty mean to you? The question echoed in the vast hall. She could have quoted something safe, something poetic. But she didn't. Instead, she thought of all the nights she'd walked home in the rain, the scars on her mother's hands, the messages from a man who called himself the stranger who somehow saw her before the world did. Her throat tightened, but her voice was clear. Beauty, she began, isn't how the world sees you. It's what keeps you standing when the world says you don't belong. A pause. Then it's the courage to show up even when no one's clapping for you. The silence after her words was heavier than sound. Then came the eruption applause. Cheers, the roar of something human breaking through the glitter. Alexander's breath caught. He didn't realize until then that he'd been crying. Quietly. His vision blurred the image of Bianca dissolving into another, a woman with kind eyes, standing under a spotlight years ago, smiling despite the tremor in her hands. His mother. For a moment, time folded. He saw them both, two women separated by decades, but bound by the same defiance. He turned his face away, pretending to sip his wine, but the glass trembled. Olivia, seated 2 rows behind, noticed and said nothing. When the host announced the winner, Bianca barely heard her name. Miss Urban Dream 2025, Bianca Johnson. The hall exploded into applause, confetti raining like colored snow. Danielle screamed from the audience, waving her phone wildly. Bianca stood frozen, crown glittering in the spotlight, disbelief flooding her chest. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Her body was too full of adrenaline, her heart too loud. She looked out at the endless sea of faces, journalists, photographers, strangers, and for one impossible second, she thought she saw him. A man in a black suit standing in the far corner, half hidden by the curtain. His eyes met hers, steady, unreadable. And even through the blinding lights, she felt the same strange calm she'd felt reading those midnight messages. But before she could blink, he was gone. The cameras swarmed, hands pulled her forward. The crown was placed on her head, the bouquet in her arms. People spoke to her, hugged her, took pictures, but she heard none of it. Inside, she was somewhere else, standing on a quiet street, watching her mother's window light flicker, hearing the voice of Mr. A whisper in her memory. "You can't inspire anyone if you collapse." She smiled through the noise. She wouldn't collapse now. Not tonight. Later, when the hall emptied and the music faded, Bianca found herself alone in the dressing room, makeup, smudged hair undone. The crown lay beside her, too heavy to wear any longer. Her phone buzzed. "From Mr. A, I watched the broadcast. You were magnificent." Her lips parted in surprise. Her pulse quickened. "You were there," she typed. A pause. Then, in my own way, "I wish I knew who you really were," she wrote, "so I could thank you properly." Another pause. "Maybe someday you will." Her throat tightened. "Why me?" The answer came slowly, as if each word cost him something. "Because you remind me that there's still something honest left in the world." Bianca stared at the message for a long time, her reflection flickering in the mirror like a candle about to go out. Then she typed back, "You helped me believe I belong here." No reply came. Not that night. At the after-party, Alexander stood near the balcony, the city lights sprawling beneath him. People toasted, congratulated, laughed. The crown jewel of Orum's campaign had just been born, the perfect success story. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt hollow. Olivia approached, glass in hand. "You did it," she said softly. "The company's image is reborn. The press is calling Bianca the heart of Orum. You should be proud." He stared into his drink. She did it. Not me. Olivia studied him for a long moment. "You care about her." "She reminds me of someone I failed," he admitted, voice low. "Someone who deserved to be seen for more than her reflection." His mother's final words echoed again in his mind. They only loved the image. He set the glass down. "I can't let that happen to her." "You can't protect her forever, Alexander." "I can try." Near midnight, Bianca stood outside the hall, crown still in its box, the Miami wind tugging at her gown. Her phone buzzed again, not with a message this time, but with an email. From Orum HQ, subject contract signing. Tomorrow, 10:00 a.m. She exhaled. It was real now. Fame, sponsorships, cameras, all waiting for her. But as she stared at the city lights reflecting in the glass doors, she couldn't shake one thought. Who was Mr. A, and why did she feel that somewhere, somehow their stories were already tangled, like two threads pulled from the same fabric? Across the bay, in his penthouse, Alexander stood by the window, watching the reflection of the same fireworks that glowed in her eyes. He still hadn't replied to her message. He typed one now, then hesitated. "Congratulations, Bianca. Tomorrow the real stage begins." He didn't send it. Instead, he deleted the text and whispered to the night, "Not yet." The city below roared with celebration music like thunder. But inside, both of them stood in the quiet center of it all, the calm before something greater, something far less forgiving. Neither of them knew it yet, but the storm had only just begun. The morning sun glittered off the glass walls of Aurum headquarters like a blade. Bianca walked through them with trembling hands. Hidden behind a polished smile, the crown from last week's victory still felt surreal. But today was different. This wasn't a stage, it was a contract. Her first modeling deal. The lobby smelled of lilies and new money. Assistants in gold badges rushed past, voices crisp, footsteps efficient. Danielle had wanted to come with her, but Bianca refused. "If I'm going to step into this world, I'll walk into it alone," she told herself. On the 30th floor, a conference room waited, sleek, minimalist, intimidating. At the head of the table sat Olivia Aurum's chief executive assistant, calm and immaculate in black. "Congratulations, Miss Johnson," Olivia said smoothly. "This contract will formalize your partnership with Aurum Global Media. The brand sees great potential in you." Bianca smiled faintly, signing each page with careful strokes. "Thank you. It still feels unreal." Olivia's expression softened for a brief second. "You earned it." The pen hovered over the final page when the door opened. Alexander King stepped in. Bianca froze. She had seen him before at the gala, maybe, or on the company's giant billboards. There was no mistaking the presence, composed, sharp, a man, carved from control. She didn't know why his sudden arrival sent a shiver through her. "Miss Johnson," he said, voice even. "Welcome officially to Aurum." "Mr. King," Olivia interjected quickly. "We didn't expect I like to meet the people who redefine my brand," he said, eyes still on Bianca. She rose politely. "I'm honored, sir." Their handshake was brief, warm, dangerous. Something flickered between them. Recognition, though, neither could name it. "Finish the signing," he told Olivia, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, Olivia's phone rang. She stepped out to answer, her voice fading into the hall. Alexander lingered. "You look different in person," he said quietly. Bianca blinked. "Different how?" He hesitated. "Stronger." The silence between them was delicate, like glass, that could shatter if either spoke too loudly. Then the door opened again. A young assistant walked in, whispering something to Olivia just outside. The door hadn't fully closed, and Bianca heard every word. "Sir, the press kit needs confirmation. Should we mention Mr. King as the main sponsor?" Olivia's reply came sharp and low. "No, she doesn't know he funded the entire event. Keep that private." The world stopped. The sound of her heartbeat drowned everything else. Alexander turned slowly. "Olivia." His tone warned her, but it was too late. Bianca's pen dropped clattering against the glass table. "You..." He took a step forward. "Bianca." "You were the sponsor," she cut him off, her voice trembling. "All this. The competition, the contract was you." His jaw tightened. "Listen to me. I am listening," she said, laughing bitterly. "You helped me because what I reminded you of a charity case. That's not..." "Then what is it?" she snapped. "Pity guilt. Some kind of personal experiment. Her words hit harder than she meant. She could see the flicker of pain in his eyes before he masked it again. "I believed in you," he said quietly. "That's all." Her throat burned. "You believed in me, or you bought me?" He didn't answer. The silence was enough. Bianca snatched the unsigned contract and threw it onto the table. "You don't get to make me your project, Mr. King. I've spent my whole life fighting for the right to stand where I am, and you turned it into another favor." Her voice cracked, but she didn't care. "I thought I'd finally earned something on my own." Alexander took a step closer. "You did. Then why hide it?" His words came out rougher than he intended. "Because if you knew, you'd never have taken the chance." She stared at him, at the man behind the curtain, the voice behind the messages, the one she had trusted, without knowing his name. Her stomach twisted as realization struck. "Mr. A." He froze. "You were him, weren't you?" The look in his eyes was answer enough. Her breath hitched. "God. All those nights I told you about my mother, my fears. You were sitting behind some glass wall playing savior. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was." He opened his mouth, but nothing came. Because the truth was too ugly to dress in words, he had wanted to save her, to control the chaos that made him feel powerless. And she had trusted a ghost he'd invented. Bianca shook her head, tears threatening, but never falling. "You know what's worse than pity, manipulation dressed as kindness." She picked up the contract again, tore it neatly in half, and let the pieces fall like snow onto the floor. "I may not have your world, Mr. King," she said, voice steady, "but I still have my dignity." Then she walked out, leaving the crown of Orum's newest star behind. The door closed softly behind her, too soft for the noise inside his chest. Alexander stood still, the torn pages scattered at his feet. Olivia re-entered pale. "Sir?" "Don't," he said quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. The glass walls reflected his image back at him, immaculate, powerful, utterly hollow. He had built his empire on control. But with one woman's truth, it all felt counterfeit. He sank into the chair she'd just vacated, staring at the broken contract. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do next. He had money, influence, reach, but none of it could rebuild trust. None of it could buy forgiveness. He'd wanted to help her, to protect her from the cruelty of the industry, but in trying to rewrite her story, he'd erased her authorship. He covered his face with his hands and whispered, "What have I done?" Outside, through the tinted glass, the city stretched endlessly, a reflection of everything he owned and nothing he understood. Across town, Bianca walked until her heels blistered, until the glamour peeled off her skin. The wind tangled her hair, smearing the last trace of stage makeup from her face. She stopped at a bus stop, clutching the torn half of the contract she'd unknowingly carried with her. On the back page, his signature bled through faintly, Alexander King. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the shelter, trying to breathe. He had believed in her. That was the worst part. She could feel the sincerity beneath the lies. But sincerity didn't undo deceit. When the bus arrived, she didn't board. She just stood there watching strangers move, people who didn't know her name, who didn't care, who had sponsored her dreams. And for a fleeting, painful moment, she wished she'd never opened that email from Miss Urban Dream. Back at Aurum, the torn contract lay abandoned on the floor. Alexander rose, eyes distant, and picked up the halves. Carefully, he placed them together, as if the paper could forgive him, where Bianca could not. He looked out at the horizon, the sunset bleeding red over Miami Bay. Maybe this was what his mother meant, that the image always consumes the woman. He'd promised himself never to repeat that sin, Yet here he was, guilty of the same. Sir Olivia said softly from the doorway, "Should I reach out to her?" He shook his head. "No, let her go." "But the campaign, I'll find another model," he said, voice hollow. "But there's only one Bianca Johnson." He turned away before she could see the tears. He'd finally stopped fighting. That night in her small apartment, Bianca tucked her mother into bed. "Did you sign it, baby?" her mother asked sleepily. Bianca hesitated. "Not yet, Ma." Her mother smiled faintly. "You will, because it's meant for you." Bianca brushed a tear from her cheek. "Maybe. Someday." She sat by the window long after her mother fell asleep, the city lights flickering like broken promises. For the first time since the competition began, she felt utterly alone and yet strangely free. In another part of the city, Alexander watched the same skyline from his penthouse, wondering if redemption could ever be earned without being asked for. Between them, the same night stretched silent, endless waiting. The rain came back to Miami, the way memories do, quietly at first, then all at once. Bianca didn't mind anymore. She had learned to live with it, to let it wash through her, instead of running for cover. A year had passed since the night her world had come apart, under golden lights and applause. In that year, she'd built something smaller, humbler, but hers. The Rise and Shine Foundation, a program she'd started in a borrowed community hall, had grown into a haven for girls who looked like her, too dark, too loud, too different for the world that measured worth in symmetry. Every Saturday morning, the room filled with laughter music and the click of borrowed heels. "Walk like you mean it," Bianca called out, clapping her hands. "Don't look at the floor. The world's already doing that for you. Make it look up." The girls laughed, wobbling down the aisle between folding chairs. A few months ago, she'd been just as unsure as them. Now, watching their awkward grace blossom into confidence, she felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. After class, she packed up the donated mirrors and makeup kits, humming under her breath. The rain tapped against the window, steady and familiar. Miami smelled of wet asphalt and salt and second chances. That's when she saw him. Alexander King stood by the entrance, soaked through hair plastered to his forehead. No chauffeur, no umbrella. Just him and something fragile in his eyes she didn't recognize. Bianca froze. For a moment she thought she was imagining it. He gave a small, uncertain smile. "I heard this is where you teach people how to shine." She swallowed heart tight. "We don't do walk-ins, Mr. King." "I was hoping for an exception." The girls whispered behind her, giggling. He looked impossibly out of place among the folding chairs and second-hand posters, a billionaire standing in a world stitched together by hope and duct tape. Bianca crossed her arms. "What are you doing here?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a white envelope, water-speckled at the edges. "I came to contribute." She didn't take it. "We don't accept donations from pity." "It's not pity," he said quietly. "It's participation." When she didn't move, he unfolded the paper, a blank check. Her eyes hardened. "You really think this fixes anything?" "No." He shook his head. "It doesn't fix what I broke. But maybe it can help build what you're creating." She exhaled sharply, torn between anger and the strange ache of remembering what they'd shared, the messages, the late-night words that had felt more like confessions than conversation. "I don't need your money, Alexander." "I know," he said. "But I want to add my name, not as a brand, not as a sponsor, as someone who believes in what you're doing." Bianca looked away, fighting the sting in her throat. "Why now?" she asked finally. "You had everything, once the chance to tell me the truth, to be honest. Why show up after I stopped caring?" He smiled faintly, sadness folding at the edges of his mouth. "Because you're the first person I've ever met who made me want to earn forgiveness instead of buying it." The words landed softly, but cut deep. The rain thickened outside, streaking the windows in silver lines. The girls had gone quiet, sensing something sacred in the air. Bianca took the check from his hand, not to keep it, but to tear it. The sound of ripping paper echoed between them. "I don't want your name on my work," she said, her voice low but steady. "You taught me something, Alexander, that truth means more than opportunity. So if you're here for redemption, you'll have to find it without a receipt." For a second he looked stunned, and then he laughed quietly, almost in relief. "I deserve that." He stepped closer, rainwater dripping from his coat. "Then tell me what I can do." Bianca hesitated. She should tell him to leave, to stay out of her world. But the part of her that still believed in people, the same part that built this foundation, couldn't. "Come back tomorrow," she said finally. "We're hosting a free workshop for high school girls. You can hand out flyers, carry boxes, be useful." He blinked, surprised. "You want me to volunteer?" She raised a brow. "You said you wanted to participate. This is what it looks like." A slow smile spread across his face, not the polished kind he wore in boardrooms, but something real, unguarded. "Then I'll be here." "Good," she said, turning away before he could see her smile back. "And wear something you don't mind getting dirty." The next morning he showed up in jeans and a plain gray shirt. The girls whispered, half in disbelief, half in delight. Alexander King, billionaire CEO, was stacking folding chairs and sweeping floors, like a man unlearning himself. Bianca watched from the corner, trying not to laugh. At one point, he caught her staring. "Don't look at me like that," he said. "I'm adjusting to manual labor." "You're doing fine," she said, grinning. "You missed a spot, though." By noon, the rain had stopped, but the clouds lingered, soft, heavy, forgiving. When the last of the students left, Bianca found him alone, wiping down the tables. His shirt was damp with sweat, his hair a mess. He looked human, and she hadn't realized until now how much that mattered. "I forgot what this felt like," he said quietly, doing something without expecting applause. Bianca leaned against the doorframe. "You get used to it." He looked at her, then eyes searching. "Does it ever stop hurting? The part where people disappoint you?" She thought for a moment. "No, but the pain changes shape. Eventually it teaches you where not to build walls." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, the kind that warned but didn't strike. "Bianca," he began, voice low, "I can't undo what I did, but I can learn from it, if you'll let me." She studied him, not the billionaire, not the man who'd hidden behind power, but the one who now stood bare before her, drenched in humility. For the first time, she didn't see control in his eyes. She saw surrender. "You don't need my permission to change, Alexander," she said softly. "Just the courage to mean it." They stood there in silence, the sound of rain starting again, gentler this time, like an echo of forgiveness neither dared name. He stepped closer, voice almost a whisper. "You once told me beauty was standing up when the world said you didn't belong." She smiled faintly. "I remember." "Then thank you," he said, "for showing me what that looks like." Bianca didn't reply. She didn't have to. Outside, the rain poured harder, sliding down the windows in shimmering trails. She walked to the door, opened it wide, and stepped out, letting the downpour soak through her clothes, her hair, her skin. Behind her, Alexander watched, motionless. For the first time since she'd met him, she wasn't running from the rain. And for the first time since he'd met her, he didn't want to control the weather. He stepped forward, joining her under the open sky. They stood side by side, the storm softening into mist. There were no promises, no apologies, only the quiet understanding that something broken could still glow in the dark. Bianca looked at him, rain glistening on her lashes. "You know this doesn't mean I forgive you." He smiled. "I know, but it feels like a beginning." That night, as the city lights reflected off puddles, like scattered constellations, Bianca unlocked her phone. An unread message blinked at the top. From Aurum Foundation HQ, subject invitation, Global Women's Summit, Chicago. She stared at it for a long time, the hum of rain outside her window. Another stage, another chance to speak. She didn't know it yet, but this invitation would bring her back to the place where everything had started, and to the question she still hadn't answered. Can love be rebuilt on truth alone? A year later, Miami was bathed in sunlight, the kind that glimmered like forgiveness after a long storm. The new glass and stone building stood proudly near the bay, its letters gleaming in gold. Bianca Foundation for Girls of Color, inside the hall, overflowed with faces, students, journalists, community leaders, and young girls holding small paper roses. Banners fluttered softly overhead. Empower. Educate. Evolve. Bianca stood backstage, clutching her speech, her breath uneven. She'd spoken at events before, but this one was different. This wasn't about sponsorships or spotlights. It was about the dream she once whispered into the dark when no one was listening. She looked down at her reflection in the mirror, not the insecure waitress from the diner, nor the beauty queen in red satin. Just Bianca Johnson, a woman who'd survived the noise long enough to find her own voice. Danielle poked her head in. "Everyone's waiting, girl." "You ready to change the world again?" Bianca smiled faintly. "Just trying to make it a little brighter." "Same thing." Danielle winked. As Bianca stepped onto the stage, a wave of applause rose to meet her. She paused for a heartbeat, scanning the crowd faces of every shade and story looking up at her with hope. Somewhere in the front row, her mother sat proudly in a soft blue dress, tears already in her eyes. Bianca smiled and began to speak. "When I was 16, she said someone told me I'd never belong in a world that worships a single kind of beauty. For a long time, I believed them, until I realized maybe I wasn't supposed to fit in. Maybe I was meant to build a place where others didn't have to shrink to be seen." Her voice trembled, but the crowd leaned closer. "This foundation isn't about me," she continued. "It's about every girl who's been told she's too dark, too loud, too poor, too different. You are not too anything. You are exactly enough." Applause thundered, but Bianca barely heard it. Her eyes had drifted to the back of the hall, where a familiar figure stood by the door. Alexander King. She hadn't seen him in months. He looked different, not in his tailored suit or the way he carried himself, but in the quiet humility that surrounded him. He wasn't the untouchable CEO anymore. He was simply Alexander the man, who'd once shattered her trust, and then spent every day since trying to rebuild it, one honest act at a time. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment the crowd disappeared. After the ceremony, the media buzzed around her, flashing cameras and microphones like lightning. Bianca smiled politely, but excused herself, stepping into the courtyard for air. The wind carried the scent of rain on the horizon, a reminder that storms could return, but they no longer terrified her. "You always did prefer the quiet after the noise," said a voice behind her. She turned. Alexander stood there holding something, not flowers, not a gift bag. A simple rolled-up document tied with a gold ribbon. "You came," she said softly. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. "I remember when you could barely afford to print your first flyer. Now look at you." She laughed quietly. "I'm still learning to believe it's real." "It's real," he said, "because you made it real." For a moment, they just stood there, the air between them charged with everything unspoken: regret, forgiveness, something fragile but alive. He handed her the rolled paper. "I have something for you." She hesitated. "Another contract." "Of a sort," he said, smiling, "but not one you'll want to tear." She unrolled it carefully. Written in bold letters across the top was Lifetime Partnership Agreement. Below the clauses were handwritten, elegant, simple term: forever value, priceless title. Mrs. King, Bianca blinked, stunned. The paper trembled in her hands. "Alexander." He took a slow breath, his voice steady but raw. "I don't have promises left to sell, Bianca. Only a truth I've learned too late. Love isn't a transaction. It's surrender." Her eyes burned. "You really think a piece of paper can fix everything?" He shook his head. "No. But I hope it can remind you that this time I'm not buying your dream. I'm asking to build it with you." The silence that followed was thick and trembling. Bianca wanted to be angry, to protect herself, the way she had learned to. But when she looked into his eyes, she didn't see the billionaire who once played God with her life. She saw a man stripped of ego standing in front of her, with nothing but love and fear and faith. For a long moment she said nothing. Then slowly she reached for his hand. "You took away my trust," once she whispered. "But you also gave me the chance to find my voice. Maybe that's why I can stand here now and say this clearly." He held his breath. "If I say yes," she continued, "it's not because you saved me. It's because somehow you taught me how to save myself." The tears that fell then were quiet, hers, then his. Somewhere inside the hall, the crowd began to clap, realizing what was happening. The applause grew waves of sound rolling through the courtyard as the golden evening light poured over them. Bianca laughed through her tears. "You always did know how to make an entrance." He smiled, his voice barely a whisper. "And you always knew how to stop my world." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small velvet box. Inside, a ring, simple silver, elegant. Not the size of the stone, but the sincerity of the gesture drew another murmur from the watching crowd. Alexander went down on one knee. "Bianca Johnson," he said, voice shaking slightly, "will you give me the honor of walking beside you, not ahead of you, not above you, for the rest of our lives?" The tears finally spilled. She nodded, unable to speak. He rose, slipping the ring onto her finger, and the hall erupted into applause. Cameras flashed, but for once, she didn't feel exposed. She felt seen. She turned toward the audience, dozens of girls beaming up at her, some with tears in their eyes, others clutching notebooks, phones, dreams. Bianca raised the microphone again, her voice trembling, but radiant. "Beauty isn't measured by the color of your skin," she said. "It's measured by the light you bring into someone else's heart." The crowd grew still. "And if anyone ever tells you that you're not enough," she continued, "stand taller, because the world needs your light more than it knows." Applause broke again, louder this time, carrying into the open sky. Later that night, after the crowd had gone, the foundation hall stood quiet under strings of fairy lights. The city glowed beyond the glass walls, its reflection shimmering on the water. Alexander and Bianca stood by the window, their fingers intertwined. "Do you ever think," he said softly, "how strange it is that we had to fall apart, just to find where we belong?" Bianca smiled. "Maybe that's what love is, not about finding someone perfect, but about learning to be imperfect together." He leaned his forehead against hers. "Then let's keep learning." Outside, the rain began again, soft, steady, familiar. But neither of them moved. For the first time, they didn't see it as something to endure. It was simply part of the rhythm of living, of loving, of beginning again. That night, as the lights dimmed and the last echo of laughter faded, a single plaque was unveiled near the foundation entrance. The Bianca King Initiative. For every girl who was told she couldn't, so she did. Bianca traced the letters with her fingertips, then looked at Alexander. "So," she whispered, smiling, "what do we build next?" He smiled back, the reflection of the city lights dancing in his eyes. "Whatever keeps the light burning." And as dawn broke over the bay, the foundation stood gleaming, not as a monument to wealth, but to resilience. Because some stories don't end with a crown or a wedding, they begin with a choice to love, to lead, and to keep shining. Beauty isn't the color you wear, it's the light you share. And if the world ever dims yours, remember someone out there still needs your glow.